Millionaire disguises himself as a beggar to see the reaction of a poor girl he fell in love with. Before we get started, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Henry watched the same scene every day from his office window. Down below, at the busy intersection outside his company, was Lillian, a humble young woman selling candy to drivers stopped at the lights. What caught Henry's attention was the fact that despite her modest situation, Lillian always seemed to be smiling, with a kind word and a smile ready for each person she attended to. With a strong posture and her head held high, she stood out amid the rush and indifference of the passers-by. For Henry, the scene seemed almost surreal. As one of the city's most successful businessmen, he had a fortune that made him respected and envied. Yet he felt inexplicably drawn to this young candy seller. While he dealt daily with people who would do anything to gain his favor for personal interests, Lillian, with her humble posture and transparent sincerity, seemed to live in a different world, a world Henry couldn't quite understand. Intrigued, Henry began paying more attention to her. Each day, he tried to understand what it was about Lillian that made her mere presence radiate a contagious peace. How could someone with so little appear genuinely happy? He found himself looking forward to that moment of the day when she would appear at the intersection, interacting with the drivers as if she knew each of them, always polite and with a smile that seemed uniquely hers. It was a stark contrast to the people in Henry's world. Everyone around him was excessively polite, but he knew that this behavior was motivated by one thing: his money. With Lillian, he feared that if he revealed himself as the millionaire he was, everything he wanted to discover in her would vanish. But how could he get closer to her without revealing his real status? Then he had an audacious and somewhat unusual idea. He would disguise himself as a beggar. He wanted to approach her as a common person, free from the barriers that wealth usually erected. The next day, he chose simple, worn clothes, dirtied his face and hair slightly, and disguised, waited in the nearby park where he knew she might see him. As Lillian finished her shift at the intersection, she began to walk through the park, where Henry waited, trying to appear casual and relaxed. As she passed by, he gave her a gentle wave and said, with the calmest voice he could muster, "Good afternoon." Lillian stopped and looked at him with a warm smile. "Good afternoon," she replied, her voice carrying a natural kindness that he rarely encountered. Henry attempted to start a casual conversation. "Do you work around here?" He kept his tone light, trying to hide his nervousness. She nodded. "I sell candy at the traffic light up there. It's hard but honest work." She smiled again, with that same brightness that Henry admired from afar. They talked for a few minutes, and Henry was impressed by Lillian's sincerity. She never showed pity or suspicion of him. On the contrary, she treated him with respect and ease, as she would any other person. That brief encounter confirmed what he suspected. Lillian was special, someone he deeply wanted to get to know, without money standing in the way. When she said goodbye and walked away, Henry sat there, watching her leave with his heart racing. In the days that followed, Henry kept up his disguise and frequented the park more often, always timing his visits to coincide with the end of Lillian's shift at the intersection. Their conversations became a routine. She would stop for a few minutes, and he would ask about her day, pretending to be just an ordinary man, unhurried and full of curiosity. Each time they met, Henry became more impressed by Lillian's lightheartedness. She spoke about the simplicity of life with a natural ease he hadn't found in anyone else. Despite her hard routine, she displayed a kindness that seemed unshakable. Instead of complaining about hardships, she celebrated small victories, like selling a bit more than usual or finding a new candy brand that drivers seemed to like. One afternoon, as they sat together on the park bench, Henry decided to take a risk and ask a more personal question. "You always seem so calm. What makes you this way?" Lillian laughed softly, as if the answer were simple. "I think we have to learn to appreciate what we have, even if it's little. That's what I try to do," she replied with a shrug. "I work hard, but I feel happy to be able to help my mother. Just knowing she's okay brings me peace." Henry fell silent, reflecting on her words. He had never known anyone who could do so much with so little and still be happy. In his world, people always seemed to want more, never satisfied. while Lillian, with so little, found contentment. When she got up to leave, Henry found himself in a dilemma. He wanted to help her, to know even more about her life, but he feared that if he revealed who he really was, all that naturalness would disappear. He decided to maintain the disguise for a while longer. As the days passed, Henry felt he knew more about Lillian. With each conversation in the park, he became more captivated by the kindness and optimism with which she faced life. However, there was something about her that remained untouched. A hidden detail, a mystery he couldn't unravel. Lillian always spoke about her routine selling candy at the traffic light, but never mentioned her home or family. Whenever he tried to deepen the conversation, she would quickly change the subject. Doubt began to take root in Henry, and he realized that to truly know Lillian's story, he would have to find out on his own. That night, Henry waited for Lillian to finish her shift at the traffic light and began following her at a safe distance. The night was cool and silent, with only the sound of their footsteps echoing on the sidewalk. He stayed in the shadows as she walked through the deserted streets, finally arriving at a modest neighborhood. The houses were small, some with peeling paint and untidy gardens. Lillian stopped in front of one of these houses, illuminated only by a dim yellow porch light, and went inside. From a distance, Henry watched her close the door. The house appeared worn, with old windows and thin curtains that allowed a partial view of the dimly lit interior. Approaching cautiously, he found a spot where he could observe without being noticed. He saw her inside a small room that seemed to be the main area, where old furniture shared space with a few personal items carefully organized. Soon, an older woman appeared in the room with a tired expression and slow steps. Lillian helped her sit on the bed with patience and gentleness, carefully administering a dose of medicine. Henry realized the woman must be her mother, and the scene moved him deeply. The young woman he knew as a simple candy seller was also a devoted caregiver, facing silent struggles to maintain her mother's well-being. But then, something unexpected caught his attention and left him stunned. After caring for her mother, Lillian went to a worn, bulky bag on a table nearby. She opened it and, to Henry's surprise, took out a large amount of cash. He watched, intrigued, as she counted the money carefully, checking each note quickly and accurately before placing it back in the bag, which she closed with utmost care. Henry was speechless. The amount was significant, much more than he thought she could have earned, selling candy at the traffic light. This sight left him confused and unsettled. Where did that money come from? Who was Lillian, really? He was starting to fall for an image of her that might not be complete, and this thought tormented him. The bag full of cash seemed to reveal a secret, a side of Lillian he didn't know. His mind filled with questions, and he found himself trying to come up with logical explanations for what he had just seen. Could Lillian be involved in something illegal? Or was there perhaps a story that explained it? The mystery grew more intense, and the only thing Henry knew for sure was that he wouldn't be able to rest until he discovered the truth. He left without her noticing, but with a racing heart and a newfound resolve. He would follow Lillian again the next night to try and understand the source of that money. The following evening, he repeated the same routine, once more, following her at a safe distance. This time, he was even more attentive, trying to catch any detail that might give him a clue. After a few minutes of walking, Lillian left the residential neighborhood and entered a less busy street, stopping in front of a rundown bar with flashing neon lights, from which loud laughter and music poured out through the half-open door. Henry stood still, watching her go inside. It wasn't the kind of place he had imagined she would frequent. Inside the bar, the atmosphere was hostile and stifling, filled with men with hardened expressions and persistent gazes. Henry peeked through the window, his stomach turning as he saw her being greeted by customers and staff. Lillian looked uncomfortable but maintained a firm posture as she served drinks and cleaned the bar counter. This wasn't the cheerful and calm job he had imagined for her. Everything there was rough and demanded constant effort on her part to remain unfazed amid crude comments and invasive stares. Henry was in shock. He had never imagined that, after a long day at the traffic light, Lillian would also face that kind of environment. where she was treated with little respect and endured it all out of pure necessity. His chest tightened with a mix of outrage and admiration. Lillian faced a harsh reality she never mentioned. He realized at that moment that the bag of money was the result of an exhausting struggle, a means of survival far beyond what he had understood until then. When he left, Henry was shaken. The image he had of Lillian was now more complex and admirable. She wasn't just a smiling young candy seller. She was someone who faced daily sacrifices, enduring humiliations and hardships he could barely imagine. A silent, persistent strength, determined at all costs to care for the one she loved. But the question that haunted him was, how could he help Lillian without revealing his disguise? He knew she would never accept help from a beggar, and his true identity might scare her or, worse, make her doubt his sincerity. He felt caught in a deep dilemma. Should he maintain his disguise and continue to approach her gradually, or risk everything and reveal who he truly was? As he walked home that night, Henry pondered all his options, feeling more determined than ever. Lillian had earned his admiration and respect, and he would do whatever he could to help her, even if it meant exposing himself and risking her trust. After all, he knew that now, more than ever, this young woman deserved much more than just words. Henry couldn't forget what he had discovered about Lillian. Knowing that she worked in a rundown bar, facing disrespectful customers, and enduring a double routine to care for her sick mother left him increasingly affected. By day, she was the kind candy seller, but at night, she endured a hostile environment to survive. He couldn't understand how someone with so little could be so resilient, hiding so much pain behind a smile. Even without knowing how to offer help, Henry continued returning to the park at the end of the day for brief encounters with Lillian. She remained the same, friendly and optimistic, never letting on the burdens she bore. Henry listened closely, looking for any signs of exhaustion or suffering, but she maintained a serene expression and an upright posture. Her willpower made him admire her even more, but it also left him uneasy. She never spoke of her night job or revealed any details about her mother or the hardships she faced. One afternoon, as they sat on a park bench, Henry decided to take a risk and carefully bring up the topic. "Lillian, you must have quite a tough routine. I notice you always seem so busy," he said, trying to sound casual. She smiled, but her eyes looked away for a moment. "Yes, a little, but nothing I can't handle," she replied with a light smile that wasn't entirely convincing. "And your mother? You've mentioned that you help her a lot," Henry ventured, hoping she would open up a bit more. Lillian nodded, appearing slightly uncomfortable. "Yes, she's not very well health-wise, but I do what I can to make sure she has what she needs," she said, forcing a smile that seemed to mask the struggles she preferred to keep hidden. Sensing that he might have gone too far, Henry changed the subject, asking about something lighter. The last thing he wanted was to pressure her into revealing more than she was ready to share. However, what he had seen the previous night would not leave his mind. The image of Lillian facing crude men in the bar, striving to maintain her composure, haunted him. In the days that followed, Henry pondered how he could help without invading her privacy or disrupting the trust they had been building. He knew he couldn't just stand by. Even while hiding his true identity, he was becoming more and more involved, unable to ignore what he knew about Lillian's daily struggles. After much thought, he decided to take a first step. He would use his influence to at least improve her working conditions at the bar. Henry knew the owners of the establishment and understood that he could intervene discreetly, without Lillian knowing. If he couldn't reveal himself or offer help directly, he could at least make her difficult situation a bit more manageable. One night, after another day of work, Henry returned to the bar, this time without his disguise. He spoke with the manager and ensured that Lillian would receive some improvements in her working conditions. He requested that she be spared the most degrading tasks, that her shift be reduced, and that she have more security in place. He made it clear that he would cover the costs as long as Lillian never found out who was behind the changes. As he left the bar, Henry felt a sense of relief. He knew it wasn't enough, but at least it was a start. He was determined to keep finding ways to help her discreetly, even if she never knew. The next day, when Lillian arrived at the park, Henry noticed a different glow in her eyes. She seemed relieved, and the fatigue he had seen in recent days was not as evident. "How was your day?" he asked, eager for her response. "Today was a little better," she replied, smiling. "Sometimes life feels a bit lighter, even if only for a moment. You know, some days have surprises like that." Henry smiled silently, pleased to know she was feeling the effects of his intervention. He felt even more motivated to continue finding ways to help. It was clear to him now that Lillian was someone he not only admired, but wanted by his side, and he would do whatever it took to make her struggles a bit more bearable. Let's play a game with those who only read the comments. Type pizza in the comments. Only those who get this far will understand. Now let's continue with the story. Henry could no longer hide his concern for Lillian. Every day he spent with her only increased his admiration and his desire to know the truth about her life. The words she avoided, the silences she left hanging, everything indicated that there were more sacrifices and hardships than she was willing to reveal. That afternoon in the park, he felt he needed to take a risk and break the mystery. The topic had weighed on his mind for days, and he knew he needed to bring it up, even if she was surprised. He took a deep breath and without preamble asked, "Lillian, the other day, I saw you leaving a bar late at night." He watched her closely, noticing the surprise on her face. "I was passing by and saw you. What do you do there?" For a moment, Lillian was silent, staring at the ground as if the words had hit her hard. It was as if the truth she had tried to hide had finally become impossible to deny. After a few seconds, she looked up at him, her eyes glistening with moisture, and took a deep breath. "I work there," she said, her voice a mixture of shame and resignation. "It's a place I would never choose to be, but it's the only option I found." She hesitated but continued, her voice more shaky with each word. "The money I make selling candy at the intersection isn't enough, so, at night, I work at the bar." Henry felt his chest tighten but remained silent, encouraging her to go on. "My mother," Lillian swallowed hard, as if the words were difficult, but looking into Henry's eyes, she seemed to find the courage she needed. "My mother is very ill. She needs urgent surgery, and every penny I earn at the bar, I save it for her. Every cent goes towards that. I would do anything to see her well again, so if the bar job is the only one that gives me that money, I have no choice." Henry tried to hold back his emotions, but his eyes burned. He never imagined the extent of the sacrifice Lillian was willing to make for her mother. The young woman he knew as a cheerful candy seller, always smiling and optimistic, was hiding a lonely and grueling struggle. Even in the face of such a harsh reality, she never complained, never revealed the anguish that he now understood consumed her every night. "I don't like what I do there," Lillian continued, now with a bitter tone in her voice, her eyes fixed on the distance. "The looks, the words I hear, that place is a burden too heavy, but I know that if I can save enough, I'll be able to pay for her surgery and maybe finally live differently." She fell silent, her face a mix of weariness and hope. Henry, in silence, felt a tight knot in his throat. Never in his life of luxuries and conveniences had he met anyone with such immense strength and generosity. Lillian was a woman willing to endure any humiliation, any sacrifice, for the love of the one who needed her most. "Lillian," Henry murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "You are incredible. I have no words." He leaned a little closer to her, his heart aching. "You shouldn't have to go through this alone." She smiled, but it was a fragile, almost broken smile. "It's what life demands of me," she replied, trying to hide the pain. "As much as I wish for a different life, I know my mother needs me. I'll fight until the end to give her a chance." Henry remained silent, absorbing everything he had just heard. He desperately wanted to offer her help, to tell her he could solve that situation with one gesture, with a single phone call, but he knew that, in his role as a beggar, he couldn't. Moreover, he feared how she would react if she found out he had lied about who he was from the beginning. "I don't know how you do it," he said, almost whispering, admiring her strength more than ever. "You would truly do anything for her." Lillian nodded, a determined glow in her eyes. "She's all I have. I would do anything." In that moment, Henry made a silent decision. He could no longer just stand by and watch. he would do everything he could to help her, so that she wouldn't have to stay in that degrading situation any longer. But he knew that, to do this, he would have to reveal the truth about who he was. And he was willing to take the risk, because the young woman he admired deserved much more than a life of sacrifices. She deserved someone by her side who could give her the support she had always lacked. When they said goodbye, he looked at Lillian with more firmness and kindness than ever. "Whatever you need, I'll be here," he said sincerely. She smiled in gratitude, but as she walked away, he knew that soon, the truth between them would need to come out. That night, Henry couldn't sleep. Lillian's words echoed in his mind, the determination in her voice, the pain hidden in her gaze, and the weight of the responsibility she carried alone. Henry had finally understood the depth of the sacrifices Lillian made to care for her mother. With each detail she revealed, he found himself more and more in love, not only with the kind and optimistic candy seller, but also with the strength and resilience she hid behind that smile. The dilemma he had been postponing for days now seemed unbearable. He knew that if he truly wanted to help her, he would have to reveal his true identity. He could no longer hide behind the disguise. But at the same time, he felt the weight of the risk. What if Lillian felt betrayed? What if she believed he had only approached her out of curiosity, as a game? The next day, Henry arrived at the park earlier than usual. He was nervous, with sweaty hands and a mind in conflict. He sat on the bench where he always met Lillian and waited. Minutes later, he saw her approaching with her light steps, though her expression was tired, reflecting the burden of the previous night. She smiled when she saw him, but he noticed a shadow of sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Lillian," he began before she could sit down. His voice came out shaky, and he had to take a deep breath to continue. "I need to tell you something." She frowned, surprised by his serious tone. "What is it?" she asked, sitting down beside him. Henry lowered his head for a moment, trying to find the right words. "I haven't been entirely honest with you." He looked into her eyes, hoping she could see the sincerity in his expression. "I'm not who you think I am, Lillian." Confusion crossed her face, and he could see the fear that something important was about to change. "What do you mean?" "My name is Henry, and I'm not a beggar," he finally admitted, his voice a mixture of relief and apprehension. "In fact, I own a large company here in the city. I am financially successful." He watched her face, waiting for any kind of reaction, but Lillian seemed too shocked to say anything. She blinked a few times, processing what she had just heard. You're a millionaire?" Her words came out in a whisper, and he saw that the shock was beginning to turn into an expression of hurt and disbelief. Henry nodded slowly. "Yes, and I didn't want you to know because everyone who approaches me does so only for my money. I wanted to know the real you, to know who you were without my wealth being an obstacle." Lillian sat in silence, absorbing each word. Her expression hardened, and she took a step back, as if she needed space to deal with the revelation. "So, you lied to me this whole time?" Her voice was choked, and Henry felt his heart tighten at the sight of the tears welling up in her eyes. "I lied? Yes," he admitted, desperate for her to understand. "But it was because, from the very beginning, you seemed different. You were someone I could admire, someone willing to fight and sacrifice. Lillian, I never meant to deceive you. I just wanted a chance to know you without the barriers that always surround me." She looked at him, her gaze sad and wounded. "And what am I to you? An experiment? A curiosity?" Her voice was cutting, and Henry realized that the trust he had so highly valued was slipping away. "No, Lillian, it's not like that," he said, stepping forward, almost pleading. "I fell in love with you. With each passing day, I saw in you an amazing person, someone I had never met before. And when I found out about your mother, about everything you do for her, I wanted so much to help you." She shook her head slowly, trying to digest what he was saying. "So it was you who spoke to the bar manager?" The question was sharp, direct, and piercing. Henry hesitated, but knew that honesty was all he could offer. "Yes, I asked them to make some changes to give you better working conditions. I didn't want you to know, but it was all I could do without revealing who I really was." Lillian looked away, and Henry saw the tears she had been holding back finally sliding down her face. He wanted desperately to reach out, to comfort her, but he knew that any touch now would only add to the pain she felt. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. "You don't understand, Henry. You made me believe I had someone I could trust, someone who understood me. But it was all just a game, a lie." Her voice cracked, and Henry felt his heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. "Lillian, It wasn't a game to me," he whispered, feeling the weight of the guilt that now suffocated him. "Please forgive me. Let me help you and your mother. I can cover all the costs of her surgery. You don't have to keep going through this." She looked at him with a gaze of deep hurt. "I don't want your help, Henry. All I wanted was honesty. Now, how can I believe anything you say?" Henry opened his mouth to respond, but the words felt useless. He had seen her endure so much, and now he knew he was the cause of yet another disappointment. He felt helpless, realizing that his good intentions had turned into an open wound. Lillian took a step back, quickly wiping away her tears. "I need some time to think." Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but firm. Henry nodded, resigned, feeling the weight of her departure like a blow. He had risked everything by revealing the truth, and now he feared that the love he felt for Lillian was a dream he had destroyed himself. Lillian turned and walked away, leaving Henry alone in the park, where all his plans and hopes seemed to crumble. The days that followed were filled with emptiness and regret for Henry. He spent every hour replaying Lillian's words, the look of disappointment in her eyes, and the moment she walked away, leaving him in the park. The revelation of his true identity, which he had hoped would bring them closer, had only created a greater distance. The more he reflected on it, the more he understood the weight of his betrayal. He couldn't deny that she was right to feel deceived. But there was something Henry couldn't ignore: Lillian's daily sacrifice. Even through his own pain, he knew that she continued to shoulder the responsibility for her mother's health and the urgent need for surgery. Determined to redeem himself, Henry decided he would do everything within his power to help her, even if Lillian would never forgive him. That week, he contacted the best doctors in the city, ensuring that Lillian's mother was evaluated by a team of specialists. He took care of every detail so she would receive the necessary treatment and covered the cost of the surgery, instructing the team not to mention his name to Lillian. For her, it would be an anonymous support, an inexplicable aid. A few days later, Henry learned that the surgery had been successfully completed. Lillian's mother was now recovering, receiving intensive care. While he knew his help had solved the financial issue, Henry felt incapable of mending the emotional chasm between him and Lillian. He hoped that one day she would understand that he had acted with his heart, but for now, he simply wanted her burdens to be lighter. Some days later, while Henry was in his office, he received an unexpected message. It was from Lillian, asking to meet him in the park where they always met. His heart raced as he read her words, a wave of hope washing over him. At the park, he saw her approaching, her face reflecting a mixture of fatigue and sadness, but also strength. Henry barely knew what to say. All he could do was wait for her to speak first. Lillian looked at him for a moment, her eyes gleaming with an intensity he had never seen before. "I found out that my mother had the surgery," she began, her voice low and hesitant. "It was a mysterious help, a kind of miracle, but I know it was you." Henry didn't try to deny it. "Yes, it was me. I didn't expect you to find out, but I had to make sure your mother received the treatment she needed. I know this doesn't erase what I did, Lillian. I know I was wrong to lie to you, but I just wanted to ease at least part of the burden you carry." Lillian sighed, crossing her arms. "You know what it means to me that my mother is out of danger. I'm grateful for that, Henry. But it doesn't change the fact that you hid who you really were." Henry nodded, respecting her tone. "I know. And I accept that maybe I've lost your trust forever. But I had to do it, Lillian. Your strength, your sacrifice, you deserve to have peace, even if I'm not by your side." The silence that followed was long and tense, and Henry noticed the tears she was holding back, the conflict on her face. After a few moments, Lillian lowered her head and took a deep breath. "I know that what you did was good. It was generous. But I need time to process all this, to trust again," she said, finally looking him in the eye. "I've never known anyone who cared about me like that, but at the same time, I never imagined that someone could deceive me in this way. I don't expect you to forgive me now, Henry said, his voice firm but hopeful. "But I want you to know that I'm here if you need me. I'll wait, Lillian. I'll wait as long as it takes, because you've shown me what true love and sacrifice are, and I fell in love with that." Lillian looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to absorb his words, and then she nodded, with a gentle, tired smile. "Maybe, one day, I'll be able to see things the way you do," she murmured, her gaze distant. "For now, I just want you to know that I'm thankful for the help, and for the time we need." And with that, Lillian said goodbye, leaving Henry with the hope that, someday, the wound he had caused might heal, and perhaps give them a chance to start again. In the days that followed their meeting, Henry tried to find a way to cope with Lillian's absence. Even though he knew he had done the right thing by helping her, he couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness and regret. Her words continued to echo in his mind, and he understood that Lillian needed time to process everything that had happened between them. Meanwhile, Lillian, now more at peace with her mother's recovery, also faced her own dilemma. She spent hours reflecting on everything Henry had done for her. She knew he had made a mistake by lying, but she also couldn't ignore his generosity. He hadn't only ensured her mother's surgery, but he had also shown a side of himself that few people ever revealed. Over time, Lillian began to realize that her initial anger was transforming. She wasn't sure if it was forgiveness, but there was something about Henry that lingered with her. His constant presence, even in the hardest moments, and his willingness to help despite his mistakes. More and more, she wondered if she could give a second chance to someone who, despite his flaws, was willing to redeem himself. A few weeks later, one quiet morning, Henry received a message he never expected. It was from Lillian, asking to meet him again in the park. His heart raced as he read her words, and a wave of hope surged within him. When he saw her, she was sitting on the bench where they always talked, her eyes distant as she watched the trees around them. He approached cautiously, his heart pounding, and sat beside her in silence, waiting for her to speak. After a few minutes, Lillian finally turned to him, her eyes soft but resolved. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about everything, Henry," she began in a calm tone, "about what you did and what it means." He listened intently, prepared to accept whatever she might say. "I know what I did was wrong," he said, sincerely. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to get close to you, but in a way that felt honest. Now I see how much I ended up complicating things." Lillian nodded, a faint smile appearing on her lips. "You know, Henry, at first, I felt deeply betrayed. But then I started to understand that, despite the lie, you truly cared about me. And against everything I imagined, you didn't give up on me, even when I pushed you away." She took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I never knew someone willing to sacrifice so much for someone they barely knew. You could have stayed away, but you chose to get closer, to help my mother and make my life a bit easier. I began to see that this also has value." Henry felt a spark of hope warm his chest. "Does that mean you forgive me?" he asked, his voice low, filled with expectation. She looked him in the eyes, the gentle glow of a sincere smile lighting up her face. "Yes, Henry, I think I'm ready to forgive. But I want us to start over with no disguises or secrets." Henry nodded, a sense of relief and gratitude flooding over him. "I promise you, Lillian, that this time everything will be different. No more lies." They spent the next few hours talking, reminiscing about good times, and sharing details about their lives that they hadn't revealed before. It was as if a new chapter was opening for both of them. As the sun began to set, Henry looked at Lillian with a smile. "Can I take you out to dinner? A real date this time." She laughed, shaking her head. "Yes, you can, but I think I'd like to pick the place," she replied playfully. With a fresh start ahead of them, Henry and Lillian walked away, side by side, ready to leave the past behind and finally build something real, based on trust and sincerity that they now knew were the foundation of any lasting relationship. In the days following their reunion, Henry and Lillian experienced what felt like a new life together. The shadows of the past still lingered, but there was now a lightness, a sense of freedom and shared relief. The revelation and forgiveness had transformed the way they looked at each other, and every conversation, every shared smile, was a step forward in building genuine trust. Henry, committed to transparency, wanted Lillian to know the real person behind the disguise. Little by little, he opened up, telling her about his childhood, about how he had built his company from the ground up, facing challenges and sacrifices to achieve success. In speaking, he also revealed the loneliness that had come with luxury and convenience. No matter how many people surrounded him, it was only in Lillian's company that he felt truly seen. Lillian listened attentively, understanding for the first time the depth of the dilemmas he carried. In return, she shared more of her own story. The abandonment by her father, the years of struggle as the sole caregiver for her mother, and the constant sacrifice of dreams she never had time to pursue. With each conversation, they felt more united, more intimate, as if they had finally found in each other someone who fully understood them. One late afternoon, while they were walking through the park, Henry turned to Lillian and held her hands, his eyes full of determination. "Lillian, I know you've never asked for my help, and I know you're proud of the life you've built," he began. "But I want you to know I'm here to support you. I don't mean financially, I mean being by your side in every way." She smiled, touched by the sincerity in his eyes. "I know, Henry, and that's more than enough. Just knowing you understand me and support me is something I've never had before." Lillian paused, then squeezed his hands. "And I want to be there for you too, no matter what happens." Her gaze was firm, and Henry felt a wave of joy and gratitude seeing that, for the first time, Lillian allowed herself to dream of something new. From that moment on, they became partners in every sense. She encouraged him to reconnect with the simplicity of life, with things he had left behind in his pursuit of success. He, in turn, showed her a world of possibilities, encouraging her to think about herself and allowing herself to dream once more. Gradually, Lillian began to believe in a different future, one where she could set aside the weight of her sacrifices. Henry suggested she go back to school and encouraged her to consider a career that would bring her satisfaction. With a bit of initial hesitation, Lillian accepted the idea and enrolled in a night class in business administration, with the dream of one day opening her own business. Every small victory she achieved was celebrated, every step made her stronger, and Henry, always by her side, felt honored to be part of the journey Lillian was finally building for herself. A few months later, Lillian surprised Henry by inviting him to dinner at her home. She wanted him to meet her mother, who was now doing much better after the surgery and ongoing treatment. Her mother meant everything to her, and the invitation for Henry to meet her was a sign that Lillian, finally, trusted him completely. On the night of the dinner, Henry arrived at Lillian's home, feeling a mix of joy and nervousness. He dressed simply, holding a bouquet of flowers for her mother. As he approached the door, he heard Lillian's quick steps as she came to greet him. She opened the door with a radiant smile, and Henry realized this was one of the most important moments of his life. "Are you ready?" she asked, half joking, half nervous. Henry nodded, trying to keep his emotions in check. "More than ready." Lillian led him into the living room, where her mother waited, sitting on the small sofa, wrapped in a blanket. She was a gentle woman with kind eyes who immediately smiled warmly when she saw him enter. "Mom, this is Henry," Lillian said with a touch of pride and affection in her voice. "The man I told you about." Lillian's mother smiled and gestured for him to come closer. "So you're Henry. Lillian speaks of you often, but this is my first time meeting you." Henry smiled, trying to hide his shyness. "It's an honor to meet you, ma'am. Your daughter is incredible, and I can only thank you for letting me be a part of her life." Lillian's mother studied him carefully before giving a slight nod, as if she had formed an opinion about him in that brief moment. "Well, if you've made my Lillian happy, then you already have my gratitude." She cast a loving glance at her daughter, and then looked back at Henry. "But remember, I'll always be here to watch over her, understand?" Henry smiled, feeling welcomed, and for a brief moment, he felt like part of their family, despite the different paths they had traveled. He helped Lillian serve dinner, and as they ate, he listened to her mother share stories of Lillian's childhood. With every story, Henry felt even more enchanted and inspired by the strength Lillian had learned from an early age. After dinner, as Lillian was clearing the dishes, her mother took the chance to speak to Henry privately. "I can see you're a good man, Henry," she said, lowering her voice so Lillian wouldn't hear. "But I know the lives of you two are very different. I hope you understand how special my daughter is." Henry nodded, touched. "I know, and I want you to know I'll do everything I can to make her happy. Lillian is the most amazing person I've ever met." Lillian's mother held his hand, conveying a kindness that moved Henry deeply. "Then you have my blessing. Take good care of her, Henry. She's all I have." When Lillian returned to the room, she found them in silent understanding. At that moment, she realized there was something special between them, a mutual acceptance that sealed the love and trust they all shared. Later, as they walked back together along the quiet street, Lillian took Henry's hand and smiled at him, her face glowing with happiness. "I think you're really part of my family now," she said, with a playful tone but also a serious gleam in her eyes. Henry pulled her closer, looking at her tenderly. "I've never felt something like this before, Lillian. I never imagined I'd find someone like you." Lillian stopped and looked at him for a moment, as if she, too, were absorbing the depth of what was happening between them. "Neither did I," she replied in a soft whisper. "For a long time, I thought my life was just about taking care of my mother and surviving. But now I can dream again." They continued walking hand in hand, exchanging glances and smiles that spoke more than words ever could. Henry knew that night was more than just a family dinner. It was the confirmation that he had finally found his place beside Lillian, and that the love they had built, forged through pain and forgiveness, was strong enough to face anything. Together with Henry's support and a secure location, Lillian finally opened the doors of her own cafe. The old building, renovated and decorated with personal touches, was exactly as she had dreamed. A welcoming space with large windows that let in natural light and a glass entrance that invited people in. More than a cafe, it became a community hub. Lillian had created an environment where local entrepreneurs could sell their products, and neighborhood residents found a place of support and belonging. For Henry, watching Lillian's passion blossom every day was inspiring. During the months of preparation, he stood by her side for every detail, from choosing the wall colors to setting up the shelves. One afternoon, while working at the cafe, Lillian turned to him with a heartfelt smile. "Henry, you really have no idea how much this means to me," she said, her eyes shining with gratitude. "When I think of everything I've been through, I never imagined I'd be here, about to make my own dream come true." Henry held her hand, feeling pride swell in his chest. "I always knew you could do anything, Lillian. You just needed a little support. And knowing I'm part of this makes me happier than any success I've ever had." With Henry by her side, and with her new skills in business administration, Lillian brought her dream to life. Slowly, the cafe became an important meeting point in the neighborhood, where locals came to chat, have coffee, and support each other. Every detail reflected the care and dedication that Lillian had poured into the project, and Henry watched it all with a heart full of pride. When Lillian's cafe had been open for a few months and was thriving, Henry began planning something he had long wanted to do: propose to her. He waited for the right moment, and one evening, after closing the cafe, invited her to a special dinner. He took her to a cozy restaurant, and at the end of the meal, led her to a private balcony where the city lights sparkled in the distance. While they admired the city lights, Henry took her hand and knelt in front of her. Surprised and emotional, she looked at him, her heart racing. "Lillian," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "since you came into my life, everything changed. You taught me what true love is, what it means to fight for something greater. And now, all I want is to spend every day by your side, sharing dreams, joys, and challenges." He opened a small box, revealing a delicate ring, sparkling under the city lights. "Lillian, will you marry me?" With tears of joy in her eyes, Lillian nodded, and a heartfelt yes escaped her lips as she threw herself into his arms. Laughing and crying at the same time, they embraced, sealing the moment with a kiss that seemed to unite all the promises of love and partnership they had built together. The wedding was set for a few weeks later, and news of their engagement quickly spread through the community. When the day finally arrived, the sky was clear and the sun shone brightly, as if blessing the couple with a special light. The ceremony took place in the same garden where they had often talked and dreamed together. Lillian wore a simple but elegant dress that suited her perfectly. With each step, she felt her heart warmed by the presence of loved ones and Henry's unwavering support. In the front row, her mother smiled proudly, her eyes brimming with joy at seeing her daughter finally finding happiness and stability. As Lillian walked down the aisle, Henry, standing at the altar, felt his heart beating faster than ever. She was radiant, her eyes glowing with emotion, and he knew this was the most special moment of his life. Every step she took brought with it memories of all they had been through together. The hardships, the forgiveness, and the love they had built, solid and true. Finally, as they stood face to face, Henry held her hands with tenderness, unable to hold back the tears streaming down his face. During their vows, he spoke with a voice choked with emotion but filled with conviction. "Lillian, you showed me the true meaning of love. With you, I learned that no material thing in the world can replace the warmth of a life shared. Today, I promise to be your partner, your support, and your friend for the rest of my life." With a smile and teary eyes, Lillian responded with her own vows. "Henry, you came into my life when I least expected it, and even through our differences, you taught me to believe that love is possible. Today, I promise to be by your side. No matter what happens, I promise to love and care for you as you cared for me." With these words, they were officially declared husband and wife, and the kiss that sealed their union drew applause and smiles from everyone present. Lillian's mother, who had watched every moment with a heart full of joy, wiped her tears, laughing and applauding the couple with pride and happiness. The reception took place at Lillian's cafe, which had been decorated with string lights and fresh flowers on every table. Friends, family, and community members celebrated their union with enthusiasm. Lillian and Henry, now husband and wife, danced to soft music amid the laughter and kind words from all around. As they danced, Henry looked into Lillian's eyes with an expression of love and gratitude. "I never imagined finding such happiness in my life, Lillian. Thank you for being my love and my reason for living." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder, feeling safe and loved as never before. "And I, Henry, never imagined life would give me such a beautiful second chance. Today, I feel that every sacrifice was worth it to reach this moment, here by your side." The night continued with laughter, shared stories, and a feeling of hope. For Lillian and Henry, this wedding was more than just a union. It was the promise of a future they had built together, brick by brick, overcoming obstacles and growing beside each other. Life wouldn't always be easy, and they knew they would face new challenges, but now they had each other, no matter what. The journey that had brought them together was marked by pain, forgiveness, and transformation, and they were ready to write the new chapters of their story together. As the night drew on, Lillian looked around, seeing the loved ones, the cafe she had built with so much effort, and the man beside her. Her husband, her love. She sighed, feeling a deep peace, knowing that, from this moment on, she would never be alone again. Together they would walk forward, building a future based on everything they had learned and the love they had chosen to live. If you enjoyed Lillian and Henry's story, please leave your thoughts in the comments. Rate the story from 0 to 10, and if you liked it, subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for the next video.